Namaste, viewers. Welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA and Jaipur Dialogue. And, as always, I request with you, please like, subscribe, and support our channel. Your feedback is important. That's what makes us better. We are today going to talk about, once again, because we have to recognize the importance of the caste war that is going against Indian Americans, and I'm specifically about Hindu Americans. So let's talk about that. And to talk about this, I have greatest of pleasure in welcoming Kohana team, Nikunj Trivedi, uh, Sudha Jagannathan ji, and Pushpita Prasad ji. Pushpita ji's name I took last because she's a fellow Bihari. So having said that, I wanted to say that it is a very gratifying moment that SB 403 did not become a law. And Governor Newsom chose wisely to not sign the bill. So that is reckoned as a victory, and it should be reckoned as a victory, but let's not get overjoyed about it. Because as a risk analyst, I always say, what are the risks of what something happens and something doesn't happen? So from that point of view, we know that we mercilessly lost it in the Senate and the legislature in California, right? Even Republicans, my party, supported the caste legislation there. Disappointing. But when it comes to वो हिंदी का कहावत है ना, सुनार के 100 लोहार का एक, so वो लोहार का एक हमने लगवा दिया. So we've succeeded in doing that. So congratulations to all of you, including other groups that did a tremendous job. So I always applaud the teamwork, and you guys have been the leader in this area. But going forward, as I say, I have seen messages floating around that this is not over. The battle is not won. It is not consigned to frozen in eternity. It is alive, kicking, because I suspect the senators and legislators and the governor who belong to the same party, he may have a pressure of his own. The legislature has the ability to perhaps veto the governor's veto, override governor's veto. So I want to ask all three of you to a specific question. As you dove into this struggle and fight, tell us what was your major obstacle and major obstacle and the difficulties you encountered. That's something which I want people to know. There's one thing I just give a quick background to that is that many Indians, even today, are not aware of this. They didn't know that this was being done to us deliberately, falsified data, falsified report, and everything else. So I'll begin with Pushpita ji now. What are the difficulties you encountered in the whole process?
Thank you, Namaste, for having us on, Vibhuti Ji. And, I think I just want to take a moment to actually pause. And, this was a big victory, but yes, there's a lot that lies ahead. And we want to thank everybody because, like you said, this was truly a community effort. We saw hundreds and hundreds of people, the type who didn't even know what a state senator is. They didn't know the difference between a state senator and a US senator, come together and start to make their voices heard, and so many different organizations. And of course, we cannot start this topic without mentioning the loss of Milind Makwana ji,
Right.
the Dalit warrior. And I was there with him that last evening when we fought together at the Cupertino City Council and got a resolution that condemned Hinduphobia, and actually the only one so far, I think, that says caste is a negative term. Very important. So I wish Milinji was around today because he was such a fearless warrior on this. And I think all of this that I just mentioned is emblematic of the problems that we encountered as we fought this fight. The complete ignorance of our community on what's going on. When we started this fight back in March, I would say, 90% of the community was unaware, easily was unaware of the larger caste fight that had been going on and the law that was introduced. And I think over the next few months, the really hard grassroots work put in by hundreds and hundreds of people. Literally, we had people going every weekend to temples and spiritual gatherings, and business, every place where you would find a gathering of Indian Americans, they would go there and hand out flyers in the parking lot and try to talk to people, right? And overall, 95% of the people they would meet, they were like, what are you talking about, what's going on? So that is the level of ignorance our community operates in. And I think that is the biggest danger, because that continues. I met somebody at Golu, right? Navratri has started. So I met somebody on Golu this weekend, and some of my friends were congratulating me, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" So, people don't even know the storm that came was fought and passed, because a lot of people were like, "I don't know what you're." So I think this ignorance is one of the biggest problems we face, because the mainstream media is pretty much on the other side. So if people hear about it at all, they hear it in a way that makes them question why anybody would work against this law. But in general, right, people don't understand the legislative process. They don't understand what damage laws can be doing, and mostly we just don't think that caste has any relevance to our lives here. So when I first mentioned caste law, people always think I'm talking about India. And I'm like, no, 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 I'm talking about right here. And then it's like this 10-minute conversation where people think I'm crazy, and they don't know what I'm talking about. And I have to keep trying to convince them that no, this is a conversation that has been happening in the US now for 4 or 5 years, and you really need to understand it. And I think this is our biggest battle going forward too, because on that end, nothing really has changed.
Okay, thank you very much. Sudhaji, thank you for joining us from Europe, where you are vacationing right now. So, welcome. And I'm seeing you for the first time on the show, but I know you. I've known about your hard work and dedication that you have shown. What, according to you, was your biggest challenge when you
Yeah.
got into this battle?
Yeah.
If there
Anyway,
is anything addition to the ignorance part that you said.
yes, yes. Again, namaste to you and thank you for inviting us. I want to say, I mean, our community was one thing. But then when we started to engage with the lawmakers, that was another big shock for us because they just did not understand what the term caste was even about. In the Senate, it passed unanimously because they all thought they were voting for a civil rights bill. They did not want to stand against a bill that claimed to be civil rights. And we just didn't have a ton of time between the time it was introduced and how quickly it went to a vote in the Judiciary Committee. And I want to let you know, we had last year, Pushpita and I had talked to the Jewish caucus leaders, explained to them, but we did not talk to the entire caucus. We only spoke to the leader. And at that time, we found out that they would not entertain that in 2022. It just shows the cluelessness we also had. We didn't realize this could come back in different forms into the Senate, right? So last year it was the Assembly, didn't go through. This time as the Senate. And the Senate leaders publicly told everybody that they have no idea what this was about. But when it came to signing off, they all voted for it. And that was a big shock, even though we had conversations. And they told us to, sometimes they said, we can make bad laws. That's our right. We can make bad laws. We don't need data. I have to tell you, this has been such a big learning for myself and everybody who fought on the ground to understand how the legislative processes work. And we still don't know the ins and outs. Okay, we are outside party looking in, whereas Senator Wahab had all of the resources at fingertips inside the system, and her primary sponsor was tied to her hip. So they had such great advantage, right, going into this particular process, whereas we were trying to whittle it away little at a time. And the Senate, we kind of didn't have the opportunity to make that impact. Although the number of people coming out from the community, writing, calling, etc., started to increase when it got to the Assembly. So in the Assembly too, we spoke to so many people. I would say first Kona itself, we brought students, and the staffers would say, we want to hear from the students. Students spoke about their fears. And the next thing we know is the assembly member in rules committee or judiciary committee is voting for it. So whatever we said wasn't making an impact, and that, I have to say, was a very frustrating and scary thing for all of us. But ultimately our persistence and the collective active action of the community leaders we have who have access to the governor. We spoke to the governor's office. We leveraged Mr. Sundarayar, right, from the Cisco case to tell his story. Anyone who heard his story was really shaken and shocked. But then what we see is next day they go vote yes for the bill. So I'm just telling you, this was a circus and it was extremely frustrating. I am just glad that at the end of the day, the calls that were made, there was one guy and a lady who called the governor's office every day. After lunch, he would pick up the phone and call the governor's office. And the governor's office finally said, I know who you are and we are recording it. Okay, I got your message. But he wouldn't let up. And that, I think, is a testament to our strength, us not giving up on this whole effort. And regardless, of the fact that we thought this would pass, but we were not willing to give up on it. And ultimately, I think good sense prevailed with the governor. He vetoed it. But let's see what happens next, huh?
I definitely am happy to see the smile on your face that despite the despair, you made it. The community made it. Your team made it. Everybody's effort made it. That's the important part at the governor's level. So, Nikunji, the question that I wanted to ask you, because you have done an enormous job, I applaud you for that publicly to all of you, the Kona as a team, and you as a leader of the team. You guys did some phenomenal work. The congressional hearings and whatever else that you have been doing. And you are going to have one more very shortly too. Tell us about this frustration part. Ignorance, process, we heard both. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Pushpita ji and Sudha ji covered everything. And again, once again, thank you for having us as always. What I would say is, besides the ignorance, and I think the one big lesson for us too is that, money talks, BS walks, essentially. So that's number one. So we have to understand, no matter how many times we make calls, no matter how many times we do this, at the end of the day, it's like, they know, yes, we know, and then they just go and vote again anyways, right? So that's the problem, because it's not about rational. And I mentioned this phrase, I'll mention it again. It's nothing to do Satyameva Jayate. Ultimately, it may be Satyameva Jayate at the end of the day, but for now, it's propaganda Meva Jayate. The amount of propaganda that was against us was crazy. And the funniest part is, if you look at the Senate analysis and the Assembly analysis of what the bill was, the people there are actually saying that yes, the Equality Lab survey is flawed, or there's not enough data, blah blah blah, but we're still going to go ahead and vote for it, right? So it goes to show that no matter what truth that we are with or standing with, at the end of the day, it requires a little bit different approach than just going with the truth. It's also about maneuvering through the processes, maneuvering through it, and ultimately using your influence in many different ways. So as we had a webinar on Sunday, and the example I gave was milk boiling. The milk doesn't just spill over the first time. It has to boil, and then it starts to spill over. And I think that is a very good example of what happened to the community. So we started to boil the milk in February, March, lots of meetings. We have gone to the entire California up and down, conferences, conventions, temples, different meetings, you name it, whether it's lawmakers, whether it's community leaders, whether it's, temple heads, etc. And we started to churn that milk, boil that milk. And slowly, the milk started to have some spillovers and saying, oh, these guys are not just crazy. They're going around and having a conversation about something very, very strong. And then a few things happened. The Cisco case was a big break, right? Where the CRD withdrew the case against Sundaraya and Ramana Kompella. So now one big leg of the stool was just removed big time. And essentially, the whole thing was standing on this idea that, hey, look, Cisco had a case. Well, that case is gone, right? Against the two employees. And then Sundaraya started to come out more and more. So we started to take advantage of that and hammer that through. Then other organizations did the same thing. They had their own political connections that they went through, worked in the background. So a combination of various partnerships with different groups and different organizations led to ultimately getting to Newsom's ears, where some key prominent community leaders, when once they had talked to us, they understood what the issue was, and then they went to the governor, and when they had the opportunity, basically put that in his ear, saying, hey, this is a problem and you need to veto it. So it was that whole boiling of milk that essentially led to the spillover at the end of the whole thing, and then the governor put the hammer on it, saying it's already covered under ancestry. And so that was the journey from February, March onwards till basically October, right? So that's where we are. And so, but one big key lesson is we are fighting nuclear attacks with bows and arrows. Okay, that is literally what we are. We're fighting a nuclear attack, continuous nuclear attack with a bunch of bows and arrows. And I think we need to gear up. we're severely outgunned and outnumbered per se. So advocacy makes a big difference. This was a lesson to be learned. There's a lot of ignorance out there. People don't need to know everything. What they need to know is they need to trust the people who are on the front lines, fund them, support them, and let them go. We cannot convince thousands of people with rational, conversations. And our people are like wonderfully rational. They love arguments. They love to discuss this at length. But how many times am I going to respond on a WhatsApp group why this is a problem? How many times am I going to have a call with someone one-on-one to explain how this is a problem? Can we do 1,000 calls, 2,000 calls, 10,000 calls? It's not possible. So people need to trust the fact that we have invested our time, energy, money, and life into this cause, and they just need to stand with us, not against us.
Very powerfully said. Milk boiling and individual effort, and this goes. I believe that teamwork matters. Giving the cricket analogy, you will not win a match if there were only 11 batsmen in it. You need various players, who have to perform a particular role. I also wanted to, I was particularly dismayed at one element. Tell me if I'm right or wrong and what your thought is on it. Ignorance apart, I found that the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, which is where it was happening, it all started with Silicon Valley, right? It all started from. I saw virtually no support coming from the entrepreneurs in that area in relation. I do not know. You can tell us more about it. I'm here to ask a question, make an inquiry. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who are millionaires in their own right. The joke goes about that you throw a stone and you will find a millionaire Indian there. Where was the support from? How was the support? Not where. How was the support from Silicon Valley entrepreneurs? And the corporate leaders, there are so many of them. There are hundreds of names touted about that Indian leaders, corporate leaders, which I appealed in my tweet. Just say one thing, that I am the CEO of Google or Microsoft or whatever. Just an example. Not because of caste privileges, but because of my performance, merit, and doing what I succeeded in doing. Merely making that statement, in my opinion, being a banker, I understand stock market, you would have probably boosted your stock. That you are there, the shareholders would have felt better that I have a competent guy running the show instead of somebody who is there because of certain considerations, as if putting the monkey off the back. Nikunj, I want you to start on that.
Yeah, and there were a few entrepreneurs who were, initially they were hesitant, but then they finally started to get convinced. So we had a few. There are also people working in the background who don't wish to come out in public. But I will make a statement about the CEOs. Do not expect them to make any such statements. They will not be able to, because of so many layers of corporate communications issues, compliance, reputational risk, many other things. So if you expect Sundar Pichai or Satya Nadella to make a comment, you could kiss that goodbye, because they're not going to make that comment. It's just not going to happen. What we can do essentially is think about like a Bill Ackman. Okay, Bill Ackman is Pershing Square. If you know the Pershing, not Pershing Square, Pershing, right? The hedge fund. And recently with the Israel issue, he made a big comment on this, right?
Yes.
And he has donated $50 million to Harvard. So he is his own boss. Essentially, he doesn't work for a corporation per se. He does obviously, but he's got a big share in there, and he's his own boss. So we need entrepreneurs and CEOs like that who are their own bosses, who can basically say, "Go take a hike. I'm going to say what I want to say because it is right, not because of some corporate jargon." So unfortunately, we didn't find those, and there are so many of them in the Silicon Valley. The reason I think they did not care was because they felt that they are untouchable. Meaning they cannot be touched with this kind of caste laws. They'll just, take their money and and use lawyers to kind of shut things off. Well, guess what? My question to them was, would you like to be the next Sundar Iyer? Because that's what he thought too. Because he never thought that he's going to be in trouble like this. Anybody can use such a law to weaponize it against anybody out there. Okay, but unfortunately, what happens is until your house is on fire, you're not going to realize it. So I felt that the entrepreneurs, sort of the big billionaires who are in their own right rich and powerful, they didn't care because of the fact that they were not convinced enough that this will be a problem. And second thing is, they are insulated from the whole thing by saying, well, if it's a problem, I'll deal with it by just throwing some money at the problem. So that's where it's really the middle level managers and the average, Ram and Sita type of people, I guess, if you want to call it, since it's Navratri, they are the ones who are going to suffer the most in this by such a law. So you have the mid-level managers who are the biggest at risk because they will be the first target of this whole thing, and small businesses. So one of the things that I do want to mention is some small businesses did step in. So we were at the AHOA convention, the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, for 3 days. And the entire 3 days we spent talking to all of these motel owners and small businesses. And sometimes they were shocked. Sometimes they didn't believe, but they all listened. Many of them listened. They stopped by the booth. First day, there was not too much. Second day, because we talked to the main leadership, etc., there was a lot more foot traffic. And by the third day, people were just lingering in the booth for like an hour just to say, wow, this is actually happening. Let me talk to someone here. Let me talk to someone there. So I think that started to happen. And there were some statements made by AHOA's leadership as well. So that starts to turn. So we did see some partnerships happening, but that came, after all this, like I said, boiling of the milk for a long time. But that's how advocacy campaigns tend to work. You got to do the work in the beginning, and then people get convinced that, hey, you know what, this guy or this lady is probably saying something. We should listen to them. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Sudhaji. On the similar vein that I wanted to check with you is that, do Indians feel, and let me be very shamelessly honest about it, let's say Hindus, because this matter was hitting Hindus hardest. So let's say Hindus, are they feeling charged up? Because, you and I are part of the process. So if you and I think what Nikunji was talking about, the fact that third day, second day, third day onwards, they began to feel that these guys are not idiots and they're not talking through their empty cells. They were making sense. So ownership of this idea, because what was important here, in my opinion, in addition to you and I, we would survive this. Our children would be feeling very helpless if this had become a law. Tell us your experience about this subject matter, particularly how the marketing of this has to happen, reaching out to the people that you may escape it. Like the CEOs of the entrepreneur category said, we will handle it by throwing money, firefight. But the children would be lost forever. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so for example, I started to stand up as a Bahujan at Kona, not because anyone asked me to. It's through when this caste thing came up. Honestly, I did not know my caste. Most people think that is a little strange, but growing up in India, that wasn't a big thing for me. I grew up in Kerala, but I just did not know my caste. I went and asked my mother, and she's 90 years old, and she said, "You don't have a caste, you have a jati." So that is her understanding. So what I'm saying is that we all had to do a lot of thinking and research, especially people like me and my circle of friends who really didn't care about it. And it was important, like Nikunj said, that day one happens and day two happens, because the bill was positioned as protecting Dalit Bahujan. So I feel like it is really a good thing that happened because of Dalit Bahujan folks like me, Aldrin Deepak, Sandeep Dadage, Milind Makwana. Everybody started to come out and say, we are Bahujan, we are Dalit, proudly. And then every other Hindu started to say, we are all together. See, that is very, very important. This was a way for them to divide and separate us. I am in the Balkans, and I'm really beginning to understand that meaning of the term Balkanization, right? Balkanization of countries and Balkanization of communities is an agenda. And so we, by coming out and saying, yeah, we are Dalit Bahujan, and we reject the fact that Tain Marie is a Dalit. If she's born in the US, nobody is born as a Dalit or Bahujan in the United States. It's stupid. So so I think that exposed that that kind of game she was playing and continues to play, and she won a lot of sympathy for it. For example, the AAPI, I don't know if it was a national or one of the state entities, supported, endorsed her. And to me, that was like saying, yes, we are the Asian American Pacific Islander. We are all about stop hate. It's okay to hate Hindus. What kind of a stance is that? That is a very, very dangerous we cannot
We are losing the connection with Sudhaji, but
Harvard
she's in
student
Europe.
associations are in such bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
No worries.
talking about the same thing, and I was wanted to
Yeah.
come to.
So let me just finish her thought. What she was, I think,
Okay.
what she was talking about was the fact that the AAPI caucus and the just the general AAPI bodies within California actually endorsed this kind of hateful bill. So it's like, okay, you can fight Asian hate, but it's okay to hate Hindus, right? Essentially, by putting this kind of legislation in place. And then you had a series of various organizations, the NAACP chapters, the South Asian Bar Association, the American Bar Association, just literally swallowing the propaganda and spitting it right out at the Hindus, right? Essentially, that was what's going on, unfortunately. And we could see that. I was like, how can you not, a lawyers association, not do the due diligence and just eat up the propaganda and just spit it right back out?
Thank you very much for Sudhaji. Your connection had broken, so that's why Nikunj stepped in. But Pushpitaji, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on this matter, which Sudhaji brought in, the marginalized communities. I think Aldrinji came with me on the show when you were there too. Aldrinji came, and Makwanaji lost his life in this particular process. How was their response? For the bill is about discrimination, and they were being discriminated. So how did all the community, all the Hindu denominations come together on this matter?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. And the fight that Milinji put up is emblematic. And when Milinji passed away, I actually Googled his background a little bit. And I wrote an article that talked about this Makwanak Jati that he came from, right? And there are very strong connections between, and if you listen to Sandeep Dedake, who has founded Apna DB, which is the largest, organization for Hindu Dalits and Bahujans in the North America, he says very clearly that, it's actually a co-option of identity to say that these folks represent me. And that was Milinji's last words too, right? He said, don't talk about us without us. So it's actually been very painful for them to see this co-option of their identity and this attempt to speak for them. And I think this is not a new battle, actually. If you see how identities are being weaponized, we are facing it right now. But Milind Makwanaji's story itself tells the battle of identities, because many people, even today, are not aware of something called the Criminal Tribes Act that applied in colonial India all the way till independence, till India gained independence and the law was abolished. Effectively, the British had the right to come in and deem anybody they felt like as criminal at birth. So newborn baby born in a certain jati or a tribe was considered more likely to be a burglar or a fraudster or a huckster or a thug. Kinners, by the way, transgenders were considered a criminal tribe too. And Milind Makwanaji's jati was also declared a criminal tribe because they had rebelled against the British for not paying excessive taxes and things like that. So this, like, when I read these stories, this was one of the reasons we fought against SB 403 so much, because to me this was literally giving the state and bad actors in the state the power to once again weaponize identity and deem people as being more oppressive, more hierarchical, and more guilty of discrimination than all the other California residents that lived around us. Basically arbitrary, right? No reason. You're just born in the you have the last, these suspicious names that equality labs had flagged at various times, and the fact that you're vegetarian, or the fact that you came from certain districts in India, or you had, this. We tried to draw community's attention to this little chart that Equality Labs had created, which was telling people how to recognize caste privilege among North people living in North America. And so you can see a bunch of very, made up criteria that really can be weaponized against anybody. And as we saw the fight, as we heard testimony in Seattle, and even before that in Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission and the various universities, we would hear this testimony of what was considered quote unquote discrimination. And it was the most random stuff, right? I did not get invited to a party, or I went to a party and I was asked to serve myself, or another person would say, somebody served me. So I always try to make people understand that, look, the reason you asked earlier, right? Why were CEOs and stuff not pushing back? I think the main thing is most of us don't think we are casteist. When we hear of caste, the words caste discrimination, most of us think of the horrendous stuff you hear in, like, mostly in the Indian media. And we know we don't do things like that. Our lives are not similar. So we cannot relate to the term caste discrimination in our day to day lives. And honestly, even the so called warriors on the other side, what they offer is really things like, oh, I was not allowed, like, my roommate eats vegetarian and will not share his utensils with me, like will not give me his pots and pans to cook my non-veg, even though otherwise we cook and eat together. Or somebody didn't call me to a party or a play date. So it's very random stuff. And you really have a hard time saying, is this a caste discrimination issue or is this something else, right? So I think that's why people in general don't think about it. But the Dalit Bahujan community fought back. And, I wish Sudha ji should have actually answered this question, because she is really part of that community. But I just know that I was and I continue to remain inspired by Milind Makwana ji and the work that Sandeep ji is doing through Apna DB, and Sudha ji and Aldrin ji. They are my everyday inspirations.
Thank you. Sudhaji, please jump in. I mean, it's a privilege to speak with you and hear your thoughts on this subject matter. Please go ahead.
No, I think I would say for maybe for the strangest of reasons, the Dalit Bahujan community really put a voice together as the front line on this campaign, right? I mean, that is the most amazing thing, because it was actually the claim was that this is for the protection of our community. It definitely was not for our protection. And the other funny thing is that it is non-Hindus who are trying to define what Hindus should be, and that is that actually being supported and promoted in media and academia and all of that, even in the legislature. The stories of alleged accusations, which had no police reports or human resources complaints against them, were being considered as proof of this thing happening. And our voices, when Aldrin speaks to media, they discount his story, saying his story is not interesting enough. Or if I am standing up as a Bahujan, I'm like not Bahujan enough. So on one hand, Sundarayar is not Hindu enough. On the other hand, I'm not Bahujan enough. I mean, it's like we can't be enough of something for somebody. So we are standing up and saying, we are Hindus. We don't have to be enough for anyone else. We are just fine with ourselves. And you don't have any authority. We have not entrusted you or called you to help us with anything. So I think the community together. Now, everybody should join Apna DB. I'm just telling you. I don't care what anybody's caste is. Everybody should join Apna DB, because we are all standing together. And we are refusing to give up our identity. Somebody, I think it was Anurag Mairal on Twitter, said, let's all claim to be Dalit. And Nikunj had a great answer to that when that was brought up one time. And he said, if we do that, we start to whitewash our identities, our diversity, our uniqueness, that we are. So we, instead of everybody claiming to be Dalit, we should all say, I'm Dalit, I'm Bahujan, I am Brahman, I'm Kshatriya, whatever it is, I'm Hindu. right? And
That's
so
right.
that is the beauty of our faith and our culture and civilization. We accept everything, right? And everybody. And if we have mistreated somebody, we also have done the right thing by stepping up and evolving and correcting ourselves. We are the one people that self-correct all the time. And I think in this battle, we showed that we are self-correcting. We don't need the state to come and monitor us and help us correct ourselves, especially when we have done nothing wrong. And I think the last thing I would say is that we have to continue to educate the larger American community, especially the politicians, and let them know that we are not a three-eyed monster somewhere as they think we are. We are just like anybody else, and they need to understand and respect our differences, just like we understand and appreciate all of the others in the great American society.
Wonderful to hear that. Thank you very much for your very erudite statement that you made, Sudhaji. Thank you so much. I remember missing you on my last conversation because you were committed somewhere else. Good to see you today here. Thank you very much for joining. Nikunji, in the remaining time that I have, I wanted to also say that the two of my favorite phrases are that knowing what we know now, where do we go from here? Right? Now we have identified people who were trying to do whatever they were trying to do to us. Knowing what we know now, where do we go from here? And in this, I wanted to specifically talk about two things. And I want all of you to give your thoughts on it. The role of media. Insofar as I'm concerned, I'm always available to echo your thoughts. Feel free to reach out to me, even at a short notice. If I'm able to, I will. However, we have to reach out to the media, the mainstream or whatever the Indian media is. How did media play the role against us? Because I'm a victim of that, so but I'm not the subject matter today. But on this particular issue, how would you go forward handling the media? And number two is a very strong word I believe in, identity. And I think you answered to Anurag, who is a friend of mine now, Anurag Myron's statement that we have to have our identity. And to that end, I want to tell every Indian here, we are not South Asians. We are Indians. We have to debunk that. You know, what Adit Satsangi says, demystify and debunk a thought. As Americans, we are not North Americans. Let's be clear about it. Likewise, we are Indians, we are not South Asians. We have to dispel that identity. I strongly feel about that. Both these questions to all three of you. Without my interruption, go ahead, take your time, and we will wrap it up after that.
So I'll let the media part, I'll let Pushpita Ji talk about it because she's had a lot of experience there, and she's done a fantastic job in positioning what our perspective has been in the media. So I'll leave that out. So let's start with where do we go from here? Okay. We know that this bill may come back in a different form or shape or with somebody's other senator or assembly member. So we'll be watchful for that. Number two is there's also a plan to go to multiple states across the US and then ultimately at the federal level. So we're watching for that too. And we urge all Hindus, and I beg to differ with you, Vibhuti Ji, I am a Hindu American. Okay. Right. So I will stick to that because I have a different reasons for it. Another day we can discuss Jaipur dialogues on that.
Sure.
But so as a Hindu American, I'm going to be watching that to see where all these things are happening. And as fellow Hindu Americans, I urge everybody to watch your legislation locally, talk to your assembly members. We're also going to be discussing with the community, right? Proactive outreach. We now have a lot of tools we have gathered over the last 8 months, let's say. We're going to deploy those tools in proactive outreach and proactive education for the community. Use SB 403 as an example to show how the state can actually come after you, potentially. Show Sundar Iyer's example. And then go and have those conversations. So we're starting a bunch of series of essentially educational series on this issue and how the community needs to be resilient and responsive on that. So that's where we're going to go from here. This battle is, we're celebrating Navaratri. And as many of us know, the battle of dharma and adharma is eternal. And when all else fails, all the devas and devis put together their strengths to essentially give Durga the current shape that Durga Devi had to defeat the Asuras, right, and the Danavas, etc. So we have to collectively come together and make sure that the fight that we are up against is not going to be going away anytime soon. Maybe not for your lifetime. So we just give our yogdan in there as part of the eternal battle of dharma and adharma, and that's how we go forward from here. Because if we don't do that, our future generations, my daughter, everyone's kids, will be impacted for sure, and they will shy away from being a Hindu, because the moment you say the word Hindu, it's like a curse word. And then you have a 10-page disclaimer that you have to essentially sign that says, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not casteist, I'm not Hindutva, I'm not violent, I'm not this, I'm not a Nazi. How does that make a young Hindu feel? Okay, think about a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, 20-year-old. How will they feel? So going forward, we have to educate, we have to empower, and we have to organize properly.
Thank you. Pushpitaji and Sudhaji, 1 minute each, because I have one more inquiry to make from all three of you. That is very important. Go ahead, please.
I will just say that media is, so we need a professional pushback. So your platform has been amazing, but I will tell you that, our side makes the mistake of feeling that we are battling ignorance. We're not battling ignorance. We are up against a very professional, very well-crafted, and very long-term strategy to deposition Hindus, Hindu diaspora communities wherever they live. And one of the emblematics I will give you of the media is that Aldrin Deepakji, who has been on your platform before, in 2021, San Francisco Chronicle. He lives in San Francisco. He's lived there for 40 years, right? And in June of 2021, I got him to talk to San Francisco Chronicle, which at that point had already written 2 stories about caste in the technology industry. And the lady took the interview, and she talked to us for like an hour, 45 minutes almost. At the end of it, she's like, oh, okay, this is very interesting, but I'm too busy, whatever, right? This happens. I come from a PR background, so I know this happens, that an interview doesn't mean coverage. I said, that's fair enough. But when you next write a story on caste, please remember, Aldrin's here, right in your neighborhood. You can use what he talked to you today, call him up again. She's like, yeah, sure. And lo and behold, 2 months later, she wrote a story on caste. With no mention of Aldrin, no mention of any perspective of a Dalit who does not agree with this narrative. And that's very emblematic. I mean, San Francisco Chronicle did this, but it's emblematic in a lot of different publications because they are almost part of the strategy to flatten your voices. And in a lot of places now, we do have journalists employed by these people. They're professional employees, right? So they're writing every day about normal stuff, but they also bring this South Asian perspective that you talked about, right? And the South Asian perspective is very clearly focused on trying to flatten Hinduism, deny us a space, and really co-opt our stories and tell it back to us in a very fake way. So I would say, I would completely echo, watch out for South Asianists everywhere. And even as we had this years-long battle, we are really wary when we encounter quote-unquote South Asian people, whether it's in a legislative staffer capacity, media, wherever, because they really come with their own biases. And they are really doing a good job of spreading their biases to their colleagues around, So more and more people from a non-South Asian background are picking this up, and which is why we at Kona have been really trying to wake up the community way before SB403 happened, right? We started our caste pushback in 2021. We put our rebuttal to Cisco in January 2021 up on the website. And we've been running education classes, 1.5-hour course on helping people understand what this caste narrative is, because most of us, even those of us from India, come with a very colonial background, and we don't really understand what's happening. We immediately tend to think of rural India or whatever, right? And we start assuming some of that guilt. So this is why we say that this is the time to just pause, maybe savor the victory for a minute, but then redouble your efforts and really support organizations like Kona, because we need a professional, organized pushback on this. This is not a battle that can be fought at an individual level.
You're on mute.
Vibhuti, you're on mute.
Yeah. My dog was barking, so I had to stall it. So now my question, Sudhaji, you go first. And now your thoughts on this matter. identity.
No, I think we are at a very big disadvantage when it comes to media, academic, publications that tell the truth. And so, for some reason, facts and truth are not very fashionable anymore, and we need to somehow change it. I have to say, Pushpita does a tremendous job of getting articles published and getting us in front of different, platforms. But we are not on NBC or ABC, or we are not on Fox Channel. We are not on. We never get any favorable stories in New York Times and Chicago Tribune and all that. I am beginning to see our teams starting to push back, focus on, let's say, one in New York Times, and push, 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 push. I don't know if it'll go anywhere. I just feel like we have to rethink our media approach. Maybe that's where we need the big monies and the big names from Silicon Valley or wherever to come in and help us to build a big media presence in this matter, because caste is only one thing, right? We are facing
Yes.
a slew of other attacks aimed at our community, and educating our community is an important thing. But the key message to our folks is get involved and stay engaged, because this is not something, protecting your dharma is not something you can outsource to somebody. You
Thank
have
you.
to do it yourself,
Very well
right?
said. My final thought, we have passed the time, 45 minutes. Beautiful conversation, very essential conversation. And my question is, each one of you take 30 seconds to answer. Everything that happens to us here impacts us seriously, and it impacts people coming from India as well. What is your thought on what kind of help that we can get from Indians in India? Because they are sending their children to study here. So it is how important it is, and what must we do to make them understand that what's happening here involves you too. Each one of you, go ahead in any order of merit sequence. Go ahead.
Pushpita, you go ahead. You first.
30 seconds. 30 seconds. Your
This is a
punchline right now.
this is a global fight. The caste narrative is used to target Hindus of diaspora communities everywhere. You've seen it in UK, we've seen it in US and in Canada, and in Australia. You're seeing it everywhere. Indians sending their children to universities all over the world. I say it's kind of like it's like you inoculate your kids against a virus, and there is a massive Hindu phobia virus in all of these places. It's beyond caste, and so please go ahead and send your kids. That's don't that's important, but make sure they're prepared, they're inoculated, and they are equipped to deal with the hate that they might encounter. 90% of them will hopefully not encounter anything significant. But just like, you lock your doors before you get burgled. You don't wait to get a burglary and then lock your doors, right? So same thing. You prepare
Excellent analogy. Excellent
you
analogy.
prepare
Thank
your
you.
kids for the
Sudhaji, your
hate that
thought on
is
that.
around them.
Sudhaji, your thought on
Yeah,
that.
no, yes. One thing I feel like is last year when I went to India, I spoke in a Kerala news media, right? They were very interested to hear what was happening in the US on Hindu phobia. So this time I'm going to talk to them about caste. And the message I'm giving them is that every parent, every student that is thinking of coming from India to the US or UK or wherever, understand that this is not a very open, friendly, welcoming society. You need to be prepared to face anything that you come face against, but also know where you can go for help. So if you're coming to the United States, know organizations like Kona, know people like Vibhuti Jha, know people like P Gurus, where you can call and say, I need help, I'm facing this. Because a lot of times our people don't know where to turn when they face some issues. So yeah, definitely we have to take and whenever any of us go to India, let's see if we can get in front of a local media, speak in the local tongue, and convey the message and be consistent in it, and ask people to be vigilant,
Thank you.
because that's the new world.
Thank you. Nikunj.
Yeah, no, I think both of them made the good points. I think people also need to be mindful, educate themselves. What are the issues going on in the U.S. As far as the Hindu community is concerned? So listen to some podcasts, listen to some of these talks that we're doing. Number two is understand cultural nuances. So sometimes what happens is saying certain words in India can have a very different impact of those same words in the U.S. So understanding those nuances is going to be very important, because you may be then accused of caste discrimination just because you said something that you did not mean it in a certain way, but that'll be used against you. And we have seen that in the anecdotes given by Equality Labs. And the third thing is, don't be scared. Okay, even though you're an international student, you have civil rights in America. It's very important for people to understand. You could be an immigrant, you could be a student, international student, you have rights in America. So if your rights are being violated by someone denying you equal protection, denying you equal rights, you have the right to stand up. You have the right to work with groups like Kona and many others, and don't hold back per se, but be vigilant.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. And Kona, for those people who are not familiar with it, stands for Coalition of Hindus of North America. So congratulations for setting that up, Nikunji, and the team that you are working with. And I have only one thing to add here. What Nikunj said, don't be afraid. Never be afraid. The more you get afraid, the more people will crush you under. So with these words, we are Hindu Americans, we are Indian Americans, we are not South Asians. Let's regain our identity. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching today. Please like, subscribe, and support our channel. Give us the feedback and, spread the word. We will talk about this media part more as we go along. Looking back, looking forward. What we have to do, we got to do. Thank you very much for joining, all of you. I will end by saying, as I always say, Satyamev Jayate. But for Satya to triumph, you got to stand up for it and you got to fight for it. That's what is important. Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.